Hey, Notcasters! It is, well, actually, no, I'm the Notcaster, aren't I? I don't even know why I described you as Notcasters. Notcasties? Who knows? It is Tuesday, 12th of December, 2021, and episode 150. My God, I can't believe I've done this, of me talking about my things. Today, I am going to be talking about David Bowie's 6th LP, Aladdin Sane, released in April 1973, hence the thematically correct and appropriate t-shirt. The t-shirt, of course, is not an original 1973 model, and it's hard to believe now that I've been talking to my phone for over a year, primarily because when I started off doing this, I don't think any of us really knew where we were going to be a year in the future, in the same way that if you'd gone a year back from then to the 10th of October 2019, none of us could have predicted that a year later we would have been in the midst of the COVID pandemic. And whilst we still are in many, many ways, obviously society is changing. There's more social interaction. Things feel a little more like they did before. But I think having gone through this, to have then gone through this and then to have just picked up from the other side with no change whatsoever and to not have learnt anything, we've missed an opportunity to reflect upon the past year and a half and how we and the world may have changed as a result thereof. Um, it's been a wild, wild ride, let's put it that way. But I'm sure I don't need to tell you that. You've already been there, you've lived through it. Today I am talking about the 6th David Bowie LP, Aladdin Sane, released in April 1973. And oh boy, pop pickers, is there a lot to talk about with this. First and foremost, I think we have to start off with the LP itself and the classic image which has been emblazoned on about a gazillion t-shirts. The lightning flash logo there, by the way, and I will quote Mr. Was Sir David of Bowie himself. Says the flash on the original Ziggy set was taken from the high voltage sign that was stuck on any box containing dangerous amounts of electricity. I was not a little peeved when Kiss purloined it. Purloining, after all, was my job. And I would like to recommend this book here, Moonage Daydream, which I think I've mentioned previously, of which approximately half of the book comes from the Aladdin Sane period, actually. It's a fascinating read, and you really get a feel for just how fantastic and unusual and strange that whole period of time might have been. I should point out, if you hear any unusual noises, I do have a kitten down here who currently is licking his knees and may or may not want to heckle at any given point. So we start off April 1973. As previously mentioned, David has produced the album Raw Power by the Stooges, one of the best bands in the world. Seen them live, fantastic band. Transformer by Lou Reed. He had also obviously done the single Man in the Middle and the Arnold Corn single as well. So he was adept at bringing other artists in and trying to produce them and trying to expand his world a little bit. Aladdin Sane was the first album which he released really in a kind of position of fame and notoriety. It sold 150,000 copies in the first week, and it was his first number one. It was the first album that he wrote from a position of anything approaching success and financial security, although obviously Main Man Productions did a very good job of separating David from his money, which will become more relevant later on as he uncovers the situation that's ongoing. This is also, I think, the album which features Mike Garson on piano for the first time, although Mike had played live, I think, on a number of songs. But this, I think, is the first one with Mike on piano, and the start of a collaboration that ran all the way through to David's penultimate album, The Next Day, released in 2013, which feels like a lifetime ago, and yet is only 8 years since that came out. So I think probably what we've got with Aladdin Sane is it's also an album that was written quite comprehensively on his first American tour. So if you look inside one of the original vinyl editions of the album, this is an RCA International early 80s version, and I'm sure it's listed on other ones as well. You can see by looking there that it gives you the location where each of those songs were written. The RHMS Ellinis was where Aladdin Sane itself was written, for example. Watch That Man was written in New York, Driving Saturday in Seattle and Phoenix, Panicking Detroit, written in Detroit. Well, that's a dead giveaway, isn't it? And then on side 2 here, Time from New Orleans, The Prettiest Star from Gloucester Road, etc., etc. I wish perhaps some songs, if they listed where they'd been recorded, would have take up the whole of this particular piece. If there's a song on Chinese democracy, it would probably list 100 towns where the song had been written. Mostly Los Angeles, but of course every town in the world, given how long the gestation period for that album was, which was a staggering 17 years. Aladdin Sane took less than 17 days, which is probably proof that procrastination is not only the thief of time, but also the enemy of creativity. When you've got a ticking clock over your head, sometimes you pull gold out because you've got to, you haven't got a choice. Obviously, some albums have been written and recorded and released that have less songs on than have actually been written, i.e. they've got some absolute howlers of songs on there. I'd like to give a particular shout out to David Bowie's Tonight and Tin Machine 2 for that particular horrible musical event, which obviously I will get to there. But by the way, neither Tonight nor Tin Machine 2 are David Bowie's worst albums. We will find out about that later on. It is not Aladdin Sane. Aladdin Sane is frankly fantastic. I love this album. It's the first one where I feel that I really have connected to it. The other ones I've connected to on an intellectual level. This one I've really connected to on on just an emotional level, which is bizarre because there's actually very little, I think, of any one given person in some of the songs that are on here, but there's some fantastic moments on it. Panicking Detroit, for example. But it opens with Watch That Man, which, by the way, was covered, although covered is not strictly the word to use, in 1974 by Lulu on the B-side of her single, The Man Who Sold the World, which is going to be an absolutely fascinating thing where we get to later on when I talk about Watch That Man. But Watch That Man is the opening track on the album, and the album opens with a leap in musical palette, I suppose probably is the word to use for it. So Ziggy Stardust, obviously lots of people go, oh, fantastic glam album, you know, huge reference to things like Mark Boland and T-Rex and Sweet and all that type of stuff. Probably Mud as well, all bands with one word, Wizard, etc. Maybe if I put the light there, that will be blinding sufficiently for you. Try not to blind you too much with the vision. But heavily indebted to the British glam scene. The songs on Ziggy Stardust, the songs on Aladdin Sane, perhaps more linked to a more sleazy, dirty American style of rock. So you can really hear the Stones' influences in this, which obviously is laid out pretty explicitly there by Let's Spend the Night Together on side 2, but also the Stooges and Raw Power and their kind of gritty, fuzzy riffs, which are a precursor of punk and metal. A really unusual sound that we've got here, and you think about it, Bowie was pretty much the UK ground zero given his role in producing Lou Reed and the Stooges as well. And it's just a very good, very strong album. However, it was released in April 1973. It was recorded in December 1973 and December 1972 and January 1973. And the first release from the album, the first thing that anybody heard from it, by the way, and this is where I have to go a little bit deeper and go into my box of 7 inches, was a song that you may or may not have heard of. If you haven't heard of it, where the hell have you been? The Jean Genie. Back to his Ziggy Stardust. So Jean Genie, the first song from Bowie's American tour. The single, by the way, doesn't feature the precursor that tells you where it was written. The album tells you that Jean Genie was written in Detroit and New York, and it was recorded in Nashville in October 1972 with some additional mixing in New York in December 1972. And the Jean Genie, by the way, I think it was only I think there's only one or two takes of this track. I think Bowie may have only sung the song in the studio once. He wasn't one for labouring on multiple vocal takes. So many of his songs, when he recorded them in the studio, he only sang them once or twice, and maybe only sang them twice because he might have fluffed a line the first time. So if you sat there thinking, well, we really want alternative Bowie vocal takes for lots of the tracks, they simply don't exist in many cases. And as you probably worked out, he's pretty good as being a musician because he could play guitar, he could play saxophone, could play keyboards, obviously could sing his jolly little socks off, was generally quite good at most things, sickeningly so. I wish I had that degree of musical dexterity. Heck, I can't even hold a fork sometimes, let alone a tune. So Jean Genie was the first song, recorded in Nashville. Written and are in, I think, where is it said, Detroit and New York, I think, and also recorded in 90 minutes, by the way, and then mixed with, I think, maybe an additional overdub a couple of months later in New York at the end of the tour. So released as a single, done, dusted, out very quickly, 6th of October 1972, which means that the Jean Genie is now 49 years old. It's older than me. Not that I necessarily want to think about things like that. And the second and third tracks, which were recorded, Driving Saturday was recorded in New York on the 9th of December 1972, and a track called All the Young Dudes, which you may or may not have heard of, which was recorded by Bowie, but then later provided to a band with a tragic name of Mob the Hoople. And I think All the Young Dudes originally appeared on a compilation album. I think this might have been its first or one of its first releases. It's called Bowie Rarest One Bowie. This is a Japanese CD which has All the Young Dudes. Which this version was recorded July 1973 in England, but the first version, as I understand it, the demo version that was used as a template for Move the Hoople or Mop the Hoople, depending on your point of view, was December 1972. So let's get to the album. The album was recorded mostly in January 1973 over about 10 or so days. Worked very quickly. Here it is. Oh, look at that. If it helps, I could say smell the vinyl, although really old vinyl smells like old books. It's not always a good smell. Opens with Watch That Man, later covered by Lulu. There's then the track Aladdin Sane, 1913, 1936, 1938, and 1970 question mark. Obviously a pun upon the word Aladdin Sane, although I think the original working title for the album was Aladdin Love Vain, or Love Aladdin Vain, I'm not sure. And I read it a couple of days ago. I tried to remember it. I thought I could remember it. Then I opened my mouth and then I realised I can't remember it. But Aladdin Sane was not the original title for the album. Third track, Driving Saturday, which was released as I think the second single from the album. I have a copy here. Here is Driving Saturday. Look at that lovely RCA sleeve there, and it's backed with Round and Round, the cover of Chuck Berry, which I believe was recorded during the Ziggy Stardust sessions, but I could be wrong. I do love these old typographical kind of designs that they had even for generic company sleeves. Absolutely gorgeous. You don't necessarily get that these days. I think if I could live at any point in time, I think I'd take my style and fashion from the 70s, but that would mean obviously I'd have to have a moustache and I'd have to have a lot of brown suits and drive an Audi. Although, having seen the interior decor that was set in the 70s, and one of the people I follow on Instagram has a 70s themed house, I'm like so jealous. Although, actually living in the 70s means no VHS players, let alone no internet. Mr. Cat has woken up, and no, he's gone back down for a sit down. Tough work being a cat, very tiring. Fourth track on the album is Panicking Detroit, and the thing with Panicking Detroit is that apparently it was inspired by a shooting that took place in Detroit, but maybe somewhere else. David Bowie kind of thought about writing a song from the perspective of being a person who was present and possibly being targeted through sniper sights when people start shooting other people, probably partially at least inspired by the murder of JFK on the 22nd of November 1963. And what a great song it is. So much so he later went and re-recorded it in 1979, and that version with some overdubs was released in 2002 on the Heathen album in the deluxe edition with the CD. Um, David Bowie never let go of a good song. He kept going at it until he felt he'd perfected it. Certainly, so a lot of the earlier songs he revisited again as an older artist when he had more money, more time, and the ability to think through the arrangements and the lyrical themes on the album, by the way. And I should kind of point out, following on from Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars, is that Aladdin Sane, according to Bowie's very own words, were basically Ziggy in America, and Ziggy as the rock star in another country, going perhaps a little bit crazy. There were some themes that were run all the way through the album, that of the battle between religion and belief versus science and fact, not suggesting that the two are mutually exclusive, around the concept of what is Earth versus what is alien, grasping with the concept of identity as to who am I, where am I, what am I doing, and also the theme about the gap between reality and perception, which he was revisiting all the way through his career, even right up to and as late as 2003's Reality album, which is called Reality for a reason, although I'm sure the reason is something to do with the gap between the cover of Reality, which is an avatar of David Bowie, versus the reality of David Bowie being, a 50-something old rock star called David Bowie. Then track 5 on the album is Cracked Actor. And at this point, pretty much every song on all of the albums are just classics. Cracked Actor is a song that even now has kind of gone on to influence a lot of other people and their writing. I think it influenced Foo Fighters. It was the name of David Bowie's 1974 tour documentary, which was shot with Alan Yentob when David was, to put it politely, fucked off his box on drugs and paranoia. And it's just a great song which he was playing even right up to his final shows in 2004, I think. Let's turn over to side 2 and let's see what's on side 2. Oh, hang on. Opening track on side 2 is Time. Here is the coloured vinyl 7-inch single of Time that you could buy from the David Bowie Is exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum in New York. This is on, I think, silver coloured vinyl. Officially, you could only get it from the museum, but at the end of the exhibition, they did have some leftover stock, so I paid an extortionate amount of money to have this imported from New York alongside another couple of rare Bowie records. Personally, I think making the records only for sale at the exhibitions was exploitative and annoying and expensive for a Bowie completist. So long ago I learned to just give up and not try and collect absolutely everything that was ever released with the words David Bowie on. If I did that, by the way, of course, I'd have to spend £3,000 to get the box set version of the Ricochet book, which contains an exclusive red vinyl 12-inch of the track Ricochet. And frankly, if I've got £3,000, I ain't spending it on a dead rock star. Anyway, Time was released as a single. It's a bizarre and unusual song with a very, very strange structure, and it kind of features not really a chorus, but it's a kind of like atonal, not necessarily atonal, but it's lacking a clear verse, chorus, bridge kind of outro type structure, and it just kind of starts and stops and it goes along a bit. It's a really strange track. Quite why it was a single, I've got no idea. It's also got perhaps some of the strangest and the most explicit lyrics that Bowie's ever written about falling wanking onto the floor. I'm not sure why it was a single. It's not that great a song, actually, truth be told. I know that will probably get me pilloried by some people on the internet, but rest assured, I think David Bowie's finest song was released in 1995, and that will pretty much surprise some of you when I tell you that my favourite David Bowie song is actually No Control, which he never played live. My second favourite song of his is I Can't Give Everything Away, so I'm very much kind of into the later periods of his career. Time was a surprising single. I wasn't necessarily expecting it to be a single. If someone said to me, pick the singles off Aladdin Sane, I certainly wouldn't have picked Time. I would have gone, well, Driving Saturday's quite good, Panicking Detroit, that's quite good, the Jean Genie is quite good. Those are your 3 singles. Of course, 2 out of 3 ain't bad, but I would never have picked out Time as being one of the singles there. Track 2, side 2, traditionally the death slot on an LP. because albums tend to get worse as they go along, especially if your name is Big Black and the album is Atomizer, at which point you sequence the album so that you put all the best songs at the start and the songs get worse as it goes along. Side 2, track 2, is The Prettiest Star, a re-recorded, revisited version of a failed 1970 single that didn't really do particularly well in the charts. Putting it technically, it fell flat on its arse and sold fuck all copies. Oh, sorry, I swore. I shouldn't have swore. But it did have the dignity of being the B-side of Time as well. And then track 3 was Let's Spend the Night Together, a cover of the Rolling Stones track, which they played live quite a lot, and Bowie played it live quite a lot as well. And at this point, I should point out that putting cover versions on albums was really, really common. Artists, because the world was very, very different, couldn't release an album every 2, 3, 4 years and then milk it with TV appearances and live shows. You did an album maybe every 6 months, maybe every 12 months. The concept of sitting down and recording a whole album as a complete work of art was very new and fresh. Artists like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, they recorded 12, 14 songs. That was the album, and it was done very, very quickly. And if you were the Stones, you recorded songs here and there, maybe a day recording this, maybe a day recording that. A couple of weeks later, a couple of extra songs. You're a couple of songs short for the album. You throw a couple of cover versions in, and you're not necessarily particularly close-minded. You're not paying particularly close attention to what's the cover look like, what's the track listing look like. What mixes are you using? It's like, well, we recorded 14 songs, 12 songs on an album, and because at the time taking singles off an album was seen as a very, very bad thing indeed. If the album was released, normally the single was completely different. So that's why there's lots of early non-album singles by David, a lot of early non-album singles by the Beatles, by the Rolling Stones, all the bands coming up from that period. Putting Jean Genie on the album, by the way, even though it was a big hit, it was regarded by some people as a rip-off because I already own Jean Genie. What is the point of me? Why is it on the album? The album should be all new stuff. So, sometimes these singles was the only place where you could get a lot of those early classic hit tracks until they had a greatest hits. And unless you were Elvis Presley, greatest hits albums weren't particularly common in the 60s and the 70s. I think the Beatles probably spearheaded that trend with the Contractual Obligation album, a collection of Beatles oldies in 1966, which they had no involvement in and couldn't actually stop from being released. But before that, greatest hits albums I don't think were particularly common at all. But as we will see, David has a lot of greatest hits albums. I haven't even got to Jean Genie, which I've mentioned, but Jean Genie was obviously a huge track, very popular. And then Lady Grinning Soul is the last song on the album, and I think it wasn't played live by David at all in his lifetime. I think the first time Lady Grinning Soul was played live was in 2017 for the 70th birthday Bowie celebration tribute show at Brixton Academy, which I saw. And I have very strong opinions about indeed. But musically, Lady Grinning Soul is a fantastic track. However, and interestingly and curiously, during the recording of the Aladdin Sane album, they did record a version of John, I'm Only Dancing, which was originally going to be on the album until Lady Grinning Soul appeared very late in the day. And I think Lady Grinning Soul is one of the more traditional songs on the album, and you may not necessarily think so because it's got this huge, unusual jazz-inflected Mike Garson piano solo. But if you listen to the vocal melody of it, and you can hear this in a lot of Bowie's work, is once you can hear it, you can't unhear it. Hugely influenced by things like music hall, the sound of music, musicals like that. There's a melody that's very, very traditionally could come out of an Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, apart from Webber's awful stuff goes on for years and years and years. And it's got that same kind of semi-operatic, semi-showpiece kind of feel in the vocal melody, which you've got all over the DRAM album, but also all the way through Bowie's career, right through to the end. As I've mentioned before, No Control, my very, very favourite Bowie track, is basically something that could have appeared in a musical when you listen to the vocal melody, but I'm giving away some of my secrets for a later episode when I talk about that. Extra tracks recorded during the Aladdin Sane period included All the Young Dudes, of course, John, I'm Only Dancing, and a number of other kind of early versions of songs. So this is where we go to some of the other releases, which came out at around about the same time. This compilation, released in 1998, Rarest One Bowie, I think was one of the first appearances of all the young dudes. It also has a version of Time recorded in 1973 and a number of songs from the Santa Monica show, which I mentioned in the previous episode. The first kind of more official CD release of Aladdin Sane is the original 1983 RCA version that's called a flat transfer, which is taken from the original masters with no EQing or overdubbing or anything like that, or a remastering. This is the 1990 Ryko disc version of it, although it's still got the sticker because I swapped over the cases from the 1999 versions. I prefer the Ryko disc masterings, they're less compressed. The Ryko disc version of Aladdin Sane contains no bonus tracks whatsoever, but I think there are some bonus tracks on the Sound and Vision box set which I've left downstairs, and that means I have to go downstairs and get it right now to show you whether it's got any on or not. And yeah, absolutely correct. As I thought, the Ryko disc version of some of the albums did contain bonus tracks. Most of them did. Aladdin Sane didn't, but the bonus track from Aladdin Sane was on the Sound and Vision box set. Here is the CD edition with the version of John, I Am Only Dancing, which was recorded in 1973. Yeah, first release, I think, for this. John, I'm Only Dancing, it said, was an Aladdin Sane outtake from 1973, but they needed to sell the box set as well as the individual CDs in the Sound and Vision series, so it wasn't on the CD, and neither was All the Young Dudes, which perhaps was an oversight, but so be it. Moving on from that, we had another couple of releases. As I've said before, Driving Saturday was released as a single. And because time respects no man or woman for that matter, they released a lot of singles at the same time, which kind of sat in and around the timeline. So Rock and Roll Suicide came out, and then there was a cover version released, which we will address shortly. And as Bowie himself points out in the Moonage Daydream book, is that if they could resell something with a picture of Ziggy Stardust on, they would. So I think, as he said himself, is that the reissue of Man Who Sold the World, who came out in about 1974, had the Ziggy Kick picture on it. You know, Space Oddity had a photograph of him with the Ziggy makeup on as well, trying to fool people into thinking that it was all Ziggy Stardust type stuff. And I don't think David was particularly pleased about that, to be honest. I clearly thought it was earlier in the book than it actually was. He said, around this time, by the way, page 183 in here, around this time RCA started sticking Ziggy photos on everything in an effort to capitalise on his success. So we had Space Oddity with Zig on the cover, The Man Who Sold the World with Zig doing his high kick, and so on. All this fuss actually put Space Oddity in the US top 20 years after its original release, which was probably quite true. By the way, if you can find a copy of the Moonage Daydream book, photographs by Mick Rock, text by David Bowie, strongly recommend it. There's lots and lots and lots of good stuff on there, which I'm going to kind of show you as we go along. They went on tour, Ziggy and his band, and they played a number of shows in such unusual places. And by the way, I'm not in no way criticising oh, that quickly reminds me, here's a press advert for Jean Genie as I just opened the Moonage Daydream book. And then there's a list of tour dates, and there's some places in here and you'd think, God, did David Bowie even hear of those places, let alone play shows in towns like Worcester, for example, or I don't know, Aberdeen or Derby or somewhere like that. I'm going to remember the days of big stadium touring when you do like 3 stadium shows or 4 stadium shows, long gone. You know, if you wanted to tour and you wanted to be successful, you didn't play to 60,000 people on one night, you played to 60,000 people over 20 nights and 3,000 people a night in all manner of unusual places when you were on tour. So it was an unusual kind of way of living, and you've got to remember also that these shows weren't filmed, they weren't on television. Bootleg cassettes of them were rare and unusual things, and so you didn't hear about the tour in advance unless there was maybe a review in the NME or the Melody Maker, or somebody maybe posted you a cutting from the the Dundee Evening Post. You experienced the show, it happened once, that was it. And if you were lucky, a live album or a live film might possibly come out, but releasing a live album of every tour or filming every concert or every staging just didn't happen. So, for example, I'm looking through the list of the places where he's playing. So, Lewisham Odeon, for example, Hanley Victoria Hall, Worcester Gaumont, Chatham Central Hall, 2 shows on the 12th of June 1973, Salisbury City Hall, and the very last show was the 3rd of July 1973 at the London Hammersmith Odeon. And this show was recorded, it was filmed by D.A. Pennebaker, who also filmed I think the Bowie documentary, the Dylan documentary, Don't Look Back, and also later on the Depeche Mode documentary 101. And it was released in 1983 as the album Ziggy Stardust, the motion picture. Ziggy Stardust, the motion picture, I think had been broadcast on television. And the version that was broadcast on television had a slightly different mix and a slightly different running order. It included 2 songs with Jeff Beck, which weren't on any official releases. That was a version of Jean Genie interspersed with a cover of the Beatles' Love Me Do, but it wasn't on here for contractual reasons. And the album and the TV broadcast version was remixed during the 1974 tour. Bowie went into the studio, and I think Earl Slick did an overdub on one song just to fix a wonky note on that. But Ziggy Stardust, the motion picture, was released in 1983 for its 10th anniversary. One would possibly say, cynically, on the backs of the Let's Dance album, which obviously became rather popular. And so this was the earliest Bowie album, earliest Bowie live album that was available for a very, very long period of time. But it wasn't the first one to be released. It was his 3rd live album, but it was the first retrospective live album recorded after the fact. And it was released in 1983 on a double LP. Here it is. There was a single, White Light, White Heat, cover version of the Velvet Underground on there. The whole thing runs to about 76 minutes, and it was produced and mixed by David Bowie and Mike Moran. It says it was remixed by Bowie and Tony Visconti and Bruce Tergerson, but it was also remixed, remastered, expanded and recompiled in 2003 for the 30th anniversary release of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. There's the expanded double CD, which has got some extra songs on it, I think, and some extra stage dialogue. And it was also released as a DVD, making its DVD debut. As far as I know, this is the first filmed Bowie show that has been released. Now the soundtrack is remixed and it's different. If you want the original 1983 version, either go for the original 1983 vinyl or the Ryko disc release in 1992. Failing that, you can either do a needle drop, as I have done, or you can have the or you can just go and buy the Ryko disc CD, or you just go, fuck it, I'm not that bothered, and you listen to the 2003 expanded CD. This is quite a nice little package, by the way, the DVD of David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust, the motion picture. Let's open it there. We've got the DVD with the lightning bolt on there. We've got a plastic sleeve. Oh, hello. And you've got just a standard DVD menu insert, but you've also got a poster. Can't have a poster without opening it up. So the poster opens up, and on one side it's a reproduction, I think, of the theatrical poster, which you may have had there. Oh no, not quite. 30th anniversary edition poster. And on the other side, photographs of various newspaper cuttings from 1973. Now this show took place on the 3rd of July 1973, which means that only one of you who is watching will appreciate, or in fact share this fact with me. So I was born on the day that David Bowie recorded a live album in July 1973, and I think only one of my viewers can share that with me because they are my brother and they were born on the same day as me. I was born on the same day as a David Bowie album was recorded, which is not something most people can say. unless more than half the world's population was born on one particular day, at which point you poor sods, because you're all going to get your bus passes on the same day as well. So live Hammersmith, July 1973. It's quite good, really good live album, well recorded. It feels a little bit truncated and a little bit rushed in its original vinyl form. It feels very much like all the extraneous inter-song chat has been removed completely, and they're just racing all the way through to the end, almost like if they don't finish the set in 83 minutes, they're all going to explode and a huge anvil's going to drop on them, much like Wile E. Coyote cartoons. That, of course, was not that. There was another kind of performance here. David Bowie played a thing called the 1980 Floor Show, which he recorded at the Marquee for American television. Audio of the television broadcast is on this bootleg here. The Beat Goes On, which is a double LP. Side 1 and Side 2 are the soundtrack to the 1973 television broadcast. Side 3 and Side 4 are copies of the soundtrack from the TV broadcast of the original Ziggy Stardust, featuring Jean Genie and Love Me Do with Jeff Beck. This is a battered old bootleg from 1980 on Toasted Records in Sydney, New South Wales. Having never been to Sydney, I have no idea whether David Bowie is big there or not. Not a clue. But when I saw it and it was affordable, and I thought, yeah, I know what you are, and I'm going to go and buy it. There was a couple of oddities that released around this period, which I will address right at the absolute very end, because there is another David Bowie record, the last one released by most of the Spiders touring band, Bowie's Pinups. Now, the reason Bowie's Pinups hasn't got a separate episode is because I don't think it deserves the attention. It's an album of cover versions, and it has very little Bowie in it whatsoever. I think this is his worst album that he has ever released. It sounds to me like a collection of B-sides that were cover versions that were recorded to be B-sides of singles that was turned into an album in order to satisfy demand for the Christmas 1973 market. At the time this was released, the concept of original recordings by original artists was somewhat nebulous. There were a lot of top of the pops impersonation albums where you buy an album with a name like, Top Pop Hits, and you had fledgling versions of people like Elton John trying to sound like T-Rex or somebody on there as they did a cover version of Get It On. I'll post a link to some of those covers later on. And certainly even in the 90s, I remember in 1992 sitting in a Burger King, of all places, listening to a sound-alikey bunch of session musicians try and do a cover version of Bob Dylan's Knocking on Heaven's Door in the style of Guns N' Roses, but cheaper, so Burger King wouldn't have to pay for radio broadcast licensing. It was appalling then, it was appalling now, and Bowie's Pinups is an album of, frankly, piss-poor cover versions recorded in a hurry. No doubt he loved these songs, and they may have meant something to him, but this album reeks of contractual obligation and a hurried attempt to satisfy the marketplace. And unlike some albums of cover versions, so for example Johnny Cash, these American recordings, when Johnny Cash covered Nine Inch Nails' Hurt, what Nine Inch Nails' Hurt was it was a Johnny Cash song that had been written by somebody else. Whereas all of these songs, none of these songs sound like David Bowie songs that happen to be written by somebody else. When he sings I Can't Explain or Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere, both of which are cover versions of The Who, it sounds like a cover version of The Who done in a hurry. And it has there's none of the fierceness that you would expect with The Who, but also there's none of the passion, the spirit. It sounds to me like he's acting the songs as opposed to living the songs, and he's singing the songs without having thought about what can I do to make this song better? How can I interpret this song in a way that really brings out its power and its meaning to me? It's more like, right, you've heard the song, you've memorized the song, you're going to copy the song, you're going to do your version of it, but your version of it is going to be like 2% different. So the 2% is going to be David Bowie's voice. There's no trace of any originality in any of the cover versions whatsoever. The cover version of Pink Floyd's See Emily Play, it's like the Pink Floyd version, but a crappy demo with David Bowie singing on. Or it's a bafflingly big seller, this, because it came straight on the heels of Aladdin Sane. It sold an enormous amount, and by the end of 1973, David Bowie had sold 1,056,400 albums in the UK alone, and 1,024,068 singles by the end of 1973 alone. There was clearly a voracious demand for it, and he would put this out probably with an eye on fulfilling his contractual obligations, making money, and keeping his hand in the charts. Which, whenever anyone says they're doing it to keep their hand in, what they really mean to tell you is, I'm doing it because I want to make some money. I hate this album. It is all crappy B-side level cover versions, and every time I listen to it I think, well, there's a David Bowie album I haven't loved, maybe this one's really, really good. Well, the answer is no. Pinups, not a patch on Aladdin Sane. Aladdin Sane is like 99% better, 99 times better than Pinups. It's a terrible, terrible album. I hate this album. I just think of it as a B-sides compilation, because in another world all the songs on there would have been B-sides to part 2 of a 2 CD single set that you would have had released in the 90s, probably discounted for 99p from Virgin Records. Aladdin Sane, very good. Pinups, bag of poo. Sorry, Pinups, but I don't like you. And there's potential in some of Bowie's cover versions. He was doing cover versions all the way through his career, right up to the point where he was covering, the Kinks and Neil Young and Pixies, right in the 2000s, with tracks like Cactus and I think it's Waterloo Sunset and things like that. He was still doing cover versions, but he became a lot more selective in his cover versions. This felt like somebody said, David, you need to record your 12 favourite songs, and you've got until 4 o'clock this afternoon. Go. There's no care in it, which is not strictly true. His cover version of God Only Knows on Tonight, it might be awful cod reggae with tinges of Tina Turner in it, but at the same point, he sings fantastically through that, and he tries to do something that isn't just a carbon copy of the original Beach Boys track. White Light, White Heat, which of course is on the live album, was recorded in a studio form, but they never felt satisfied with it, and so the backing track, which is basically from the Pinup sessions, had a different vocal stuck to it, and it went out on Mick Ronson's solo album, Play Don't Worry. There was also 2 extra songs which are really, really important in the Bowie canon around this time. There was a single of The Man Who Sold the World, backed with Watch That Man, performed by Lulu, that was released. But what I didn't realise until very, very recently is that single was produced by David Bowie. It was performed and it was recorded during the sessions for Pinups. The only thing about those songs that isn't David Bowie is the Lulu lead vocal on the A and the B side. Everything else is completely, Pinups era, and it's easily the best stuff out of the Pinups era by 1,000 million gazillion miles. And I listened to the cover version of The Man Who Sold the World by Lulu and Watch That Man. To me, it feels like the missing link between Aladdin Sane and Pinups and the Diamond Dogs album, which is the next Bowie episode, which I'm going to be doing. Lulu single, it's a terrible state of affairs when the best thing to happen out of a whole David Bowie album is actually a Lulu single of revamped, rocked up cover versions of old tracks. Now, one of the favourite songs on here was Sorrow. Sorrow was released as a single, and it's somewhere in my pile of singles. Here it is. Sorrow, backed with a cover version of Jack Brel's Port of Amsterdam as well. So on the Riker disc version of Pinups, by the way, we have 2 bonus tracks. One is Port of Amsterdam, and the other one is a cover version of I think it's Bruce Springsteen's Growing Up, which apparently was recorded during the sessions for the Pinups album, but strictly speaking, I don't believe that's actually the case. So this is not the Ryko disc edition. This is an EMI version with the same track listing and cover. But again, if you're going to get any version of any of the Bowie stuff, do get the Ryko disc versions. Nearly finished, which is good news. No surprise, Aladdin Sane is on the 5 years box set alongside... actually, no, it isn't, is it? No, complete fib. It's not on that. It's on something else. Sorry, no, it is. It's on here alongside Pinups. And well, if you only have one David Bowie box set, you probably need to get these. series. I don't know why I completely misled you there, probably because I was forgetful. The last thing I'm going to show you, which was recorded during the period but not released until 1989, is this very unusual Russian compilation LP called Starman, or at least that's the translation of it. In Russia, this is the Russian version of Starman, so I don't think this was ever approved by David at all. There was a state-run label called Melodia, and they released very, very few albums of Western artists. Starman, for example, this one here, was released with an out-of-time photograph. This one, in fact, is blocked on Discogs because Melodia didn't have the rights to release it. So technically speaking, this is a bootleg David Bowie LP that was pressed and released by the Russian state record label Melodia in 1989. It's really difficult to work out what's on it. It's the tracks running from Space Oddity through to Ziggy Stardust. And as you can probably tell, it's cheap, thin paper, cheaply pressed vinyl. It's not particularly good. It's nice to have, but it's not a great pressing at all. But it's one of those things, and I saw it and I'm like, oh yeah, you're nice and weird, I'm going to buy you. So there we are. That is David Bowie's Aladdin Sane and Pinups. Pinups, no good, very bad, terrible indeed. Aladdin Sane, much, much better. Absolutely fantastic. Cannot recommend it enough. Love this album. That's where I'm going to wrap up. Next time I talk about David Bowie, I'm going to talk about the Diamond Dogs album from 1974. And I get more and more passionate as I go along because I get more and more into Bowie with each passing year. And that's where I'm going to stop. I'm going to post some links to some live shows, the Lulu single, so on and so forth. In the meantime, stay beautiful, take care of yourselves. My next one is probably going to be about Pet Shop Boys' Electric album. So take care of yourselves and each other, and see you all soon. Bye. Oh no, I haven't switched it off. I've forgotten to press the switch off button. Right, well, I'm going to have to switch it off then. There you go, just to prove it's not a slick stadium show here. This is the bit at the end where it doesn't go to plan. See you later. Bye.